Welcome to Daily Dose Radio, a 5-minute devotional podcast studying the Psalms verse by verse. Broadcast from the ever-beautiful Sharonville, Ohio, on the sunny side of Cincinnati. Welcome back to Daily Dose Radio. This is the finest farm-to-table Bible study on the Internet. Maybe the only farm-to-table Bible study on the Internet. I don't know. But it's good. It's fresh. Comes right out of the field. I grow it. You eat it. Come on in. Sit down. We got a nice little table here waiting for you. Today we're looking at the next 3 items in our definition of the redeemed man. Yesterday we began our definition with the first 3, which really just are about a biblical spirituality, perfection, righteousness, and truth. All of those are part of what happens when we come to faith in Christ Jesus. They are imputed to us, all of it. There is no perfection in us, there is no righteousness in us, and there is no truth in us. Only as we have a relationship with God the Father through His Son Jesus do we find any of these 3 things in the human heart. Today we're going to look at the next 3, 4, 5, and 6, and all of these center around the tongue. And I want you to notice how inductive this is. We begin with a very broad statement, and then as each one of these occurs, we're narrowing the focus. So it's like a funnel. We're broad at the top, very narrow at the bottom. All right, so let's begin. I'm going to read verse 3. I'll try to explain what I'm talking about. He takes no slander upon his tongue. He does no evil to his neighbor, and he does not lift up a reproach against the one who lives near him. And it's all about the tongue, isn't it? Interesting how very, very focused on the tongue the psalmist is. Always there's something in the Psalms about the tongue, about whether it's being used rightly or wrongly. Here we have the tongue being used rightly. No slander is upon the tongue. Now I said this is the general statement. That's why this is inductive, because we have this general statement. The redeemed man doesn't take slander upon his tongue. So in no circumstance, no matter where he is, he doesn't do that. There's nothing like that on his tongue. Remember, under the tongue of the wicked man, there's mischief and wickedness. Or if you want, mischief and wickedness. But there's none of that on the tongue of the redeemed man. There's no slander there. Okay, the second, or the number 5 characteristic, second and number 3, but number 5 overall, is that he does no evil to his neighbor. That is, he doesn't talk evil to him, he doesn't behave evil toward him, he doesn't make devices that are going to attack him or deprive him or weaken him or, whatever. So, no evil to his neighbor. So instead of this broad statement about no slander on the tongue, suddenly now we've narrowed it down to the neighbor. Who are we talking about in the first place? In number 4, we're talking about generally everyone. Now we narrow it down to the neighbor. So no evil to the neighbor. And who is the neighbor? Well, the neighbor is kind of a broad idea too, because remember what Jesus taught us in the New Testament was that the man who's the neighbor is the man who's next to you, or the man who's away from you. It's your brother. It's whoever is in humanity that you happen to see today. Well, that's your neighbor. So the neighborliness of the gospel message comes through here. He does no evil to his neighbor, and we know that the neighbor is not someone far away, but it just happens to be whoever is within your vicinity that day. Then we have, he does not lift up a reproach against the one who lives near him. Now this is very specific. We're talking about the guy who lives next door, not just generally the neighborhood of man, but we're talking about generally or specifically now the one who lives near you. So who lives on either side or above or below you? Well, that's your neighbor too. And so whether it's generally speaking the neighborhood of man, or if it's specifically speaking the person that lives beside you, you're not to lift up a reproach. And again, here's the tongue. And how is it being used? Well, it's being used not to lift up a reproach. So no slander, no evil to the neighbor, that is, the general neighborhood of men, and no reproach against the one that lives next to you. The redeemed man does all of these. He doesn't take slander upon his tongue. He doesn't do evil to his neighbor, and he doesn't lift up a reproach against the guy that lives next door. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow. We'll talk about the eyes and the heart of the redeemed man on Daily Dose Radio. Thanks for listening to Daily Dose Radio. I'm David Smith. The music today has been performed by the Bluegrass Experiment. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you next time on Daily Dose Radio.